Hi guys, welcome to this page of the notes. Again, I got another one of these problems where we're going to be doing composite functions where I have given you the actual functions. There's the function f of x, there's the function g of x, and hopefully you're coming back to just check your answers. You've worked ahead to see how it goes on your own. So let's jump right into it and see if you get what I get. We'll start with the f of g of x. So I'm going to find f of g of x, which means I'm finding this composite function where I'm going to take and plug g of x, plug this function, g of x, into the function f of x, which means I need to start with f of x. All right, so f of x is equal to x minus 5. I'm now going to plug g of x into f of x. So g of x is my domain value, right? I'm plugging g of x into f of x. So I'm going to plug in a g of x everywhere I have an x, which is right there. There's my x. So that is now going to become a g of x, and I still have the minus 5. Well, what is g of x? It's an x squared plus 2x plus 3. So plug that in. X squared plus 2x plus 3 minus 5. Go ahead and combine like terms. And I get the composite function f of g of x. Plugging g of x into f of x, I get x squared plus 2x plus 5, plus 3 minus 5 is a minus 2. But then I ask you to evaluate at x equals a negative 3. So let's do that. So I'm going to do f of g of a minus 3. Where minus 3 is my domain value, which means I'm going to plug that domain value in everywhere I have an x and evaluate my composite function to get out my range value. All right, so here we go. We plug in that plug in that domain value of negative 3 everywhere I have an x. So minus 3 squared plus 2 times a minus 3 minus 2. So f of g of minus 3 is equal to, negative 3 squared is going to be 9 minus 6 minus 2. So my composite function, f of g of negative 3, evaluating my composite function at the domain value of negative 3 is going to give me, that's a negative 8, so it should be a positive 1. Two answers. The composite function f of g of x, and then evaluating f of g at negative 3 to get a positive 1. Okay, let's keep going and do the next one. I want to do g of f of x. Let me slide that over there a little bit. You should be able to see that. We'll divide this guy here, so I've got you don't separate f of g of x from g of f of x. And here we go, g of f of x. All right, we're going to plug the function f of x into the function g of x, which means I need g of x first. G of x is equal to x squared plus 2x plus 3. That is my g of x. I'm now going to plug f of x into that. So g of f of x means everywhere I have an x, I plug in an f of x. So f of x squared plus 2 times f of x, right? Because there's another x, plug in an f of x, plus 3. Well, what is f of x? Well, f of x is equal to x minus 5. So g of f of x is equal to x minus 5 squared plus 2 times x minus 5 plus 3. Slightly more work in this one than the last one. I'm still going to need to FOIL that. It's a binomial, so this is not a property of exponents. It's x minus 5 times x minus 5. You'll have to FOIL it out. And then I'll need to distribute the 2 through the parentheses. And once I've done all that, combine like terms. So let's see how this goes. Okay, so x minus 5 times x minus 5 is going to be x squared minus 5x plus 25. Let's see. 2 times x is going to be 2x. Sorry guys, I'm squeezing here. 2 times a negative 5 is going to be a minus 10. And then I still have that, sorry, plus 3 on the end. Really, really sorry about having to squeeze that in there. Got that plus 3 there on the end. Combine like terms, it'll shrink down. It'll fit this time. X squared. Okay, negative 5x is going to be a negative 10x, but then I add 2x to it, which would be a minus 8x. Then I have a plus 25 minus 10, which would be a positive 15, and then I add 3 to that, so plus 18. So this is my composite function, g of f of x, x squared minus 8x plus 18. And now they ask you to evaluate that guy. So let's go ahead and evaluate that guy. At x equals negative 3. What that means is I need to plug a negative 3 in as my domain value. So g of f of minus 3. So I'm going to have a negative 3 squared minus 8 times a negative 3 plus 18, which means g of f of negative 3 is equal to 9 plus 24 plus 18. And you should wind up g of f of negative 3 is equal to a 51. Again, I was asked to find the composite function g of f of x and then evaluate that composite function at the domain value of negative 3, which means plugging a negative 3 into the composite function everywhere I have an x. Simply evaluate, don't fat finger something on your calculator, you come up with a 51. Okay, what I'm going to do next, the next page of the notes are going to be a couple of word problems where we're going to set up composite functions using a word problem, sort of a real-world scenario where we can set up composite functions and use those composite functions to help us figure something out. So head on over to the next page of the notes. We'll take a look at some word problems, and I'll meet you guys there.